Why is Anne Frank one of the most well-known victims of the Holocaust? How did she manage to escape the Germans? What was the cause of her death? In this report, we'll discuss that topic and many others. Anne Frank was a teenager who unfortunately had to live her short life during one of the worst times in humanity. She channeled her feelings through her artistic side, specifically in writing. When she turned 13, she received a diary, and thanks to that simple object, she not only helped herself, but she also showed the rest of the world what reality was in that sick Europe. Her creative spark focused on telling her own testimony of the horrors she was living, in part to help herself understand why she had to go through such a fate. She spent her last years enclosed in a shelter known as the Secret Annex. Thanks to this clandestine site, she was able, along with her family and others, to evade the persecution that the Third Reich had on her people. Eventually, the police found out where they were hiding, and a path towards darkness began on August 4th, 1944. The day Anne Frank was captured. Before we begin, I would like you to tell me if you knew Anne Frank and how did you hear about her? And what do you think of her book if you had the chance to read it? And I also want to know if you have any theories about who was the person who denounced her family? If this even happened, I want to read your opinions down below, and I also invite you to leave suggestions for possible future videos on this channel. Like, subscribe, and enable notifications. Without anything else to say, let's get started. August 1st, 1944. Anne Frank, after more than 2 years hidden in what she called the house behind, wrote what would be the last entry in her diary. 3 days later, her dreams and illusions were captured amidst desperation. After 770 days of hiding with her family and other people, the German claws found their hiding place. Upon entering, the Nazis ransacked everything while looking for valuable objects. They didn't care about pushing, breaking, and hitting. They shook bags, suitcases, and drawers. From them fell only a few valuables, but among those objects were also the red notebook and the pages with Anne's writings. When the officers took away the people in hiding and their protectors, they did not notice that on the wooden floor there was a masterpiece that would change the world. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To understand what happened after their arrest, it is necessary that we start from the beginning. Otto Heinrich Frank was a soldier in the service of the German Imperial Army during the course of World War I. Upon returning, he worked as a bank employee at an institution founded by his father. During those years, he met Edith Hollander, daughter and heiress of a family dedicated to industrial products and scrap. He married her in 1925. A year later, Margot would be born on the 12th of June, 1929. At the Mango Hospital of the Red Cross in Frankfurt am Main, Germany, the family of Anneliese Mary Frank, known in Spanish as Anna Frank, would arrive. With the birth of the little girl, a new stage was expected in the life of this German Jewish family. But the economic crisis of 1930 took Otto's job away, and they had to rethink several situations. As if this were not enough, that same year the Third Reich would begin to be forged. The Führer, who led the National Socialist German Workers' Party, had won the elections, and with him arose a very real threat. By January 30th, 1933, the President of the Reich, Paul von Hindenburg, appointed Adolf the Chancellor of Germany. With the National Socialist German Workers' Party, Anna's parents understood there was no future for them in that country. For this reason, they decided to move to a new destination, the Netherlands. This was the most feasible option, since they had acquaintances there who could help them find work and a home. Moreover, Margot and Anna could lead a healthy life. The first to settle there was their father, Otto. Without wasting any time, he founded a company that had its roots in Germany. In this new branch, they manufactured and distributed gelling products for jams. Months later, his wife Edith came to find a house. Meanwhile, their daughters stayed with one of their grandmothers near the German border with Belgium. In January 1934, the entire family was reunited with Anna's arrival. That same year, the girl entered a school in Montessori. While the FO1 Führer advanced in his career to assume control, Holland seemed a safe place not only for the Franks, but for more than 4,000 Jews who migrated to the country in the face of the wave of anti-Semitism. Anne had barely learned to speak in German. Holland would not only give her the best years of her life, but also the language that would lead her to immortality. There, the little girl pursued her studies and grew up, while her intellectual curiosity developed alongside her games and pranks. Several photographs of the time show her smiling with a pen in her hand. No one knew this was a premonition of the future. The Franks lived in a multicultural neighborhood where the children were Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, and played regardless of religious orientations. The family itself was a regular of Judaism, but they belonged to a progressive branch. In other words, they maintained certain traditions and rites, but they were not orthodox. Another tradition they had in Anne's home was constant reading. Her parents had put together a significant collection of books. That library was a refuge for Edith and Otto, and also a place for family gatherings. The Franks instilled the habit of reading in their daughters, who embraced the written word as another recreational activity, apart from the typical games of childhood. That was their connection to the world beyond their own lives. In addition to seemingly accelerated growth, Anna was described as a person with a personality brimming with charm, a curious gaze, always smiling and ready to socialize. But, on the other hand, her health was delicate from an early age, which forced her to miss a lot of classes due to minor illnesses. Her family nicknamed her porcelain doll because of the different ailments that plagued her from the start of her life. Despite this, she loved interacting with her classmates and studying every time she went to school. In the classrooms of the school, Anna found a place to cultivate her two deepest passions, writing and acting. These passions led her to create plays in which the children themselves, including her, acted. These plays were not only a form of artistic expression, but also a showcase of her innate creativity and her ability to tell stories. For Anna, the world of Hollywood film became a fascinating dream. But she wasn't just limited to acting, she also considered the possibility of becoming a writer or journalist. Almost unbeknownst to her, this innate desire would mark the rest of her short but intense life. Years later, during the summer of 1941, Anna had to change schools and leave all her friends behind to enroll with her sister Margot in the Jewish high school. By that time, Germany had already invaded the Netherlands, and Jewish children were forbidden from going to the same schools as non-Jews. By that time, anti-Semitic speeches were reaching the ears of a large part of the European population. Stories about the concentration camps were already circulating. The good days had an expiration date, June 12, 1942. Anne turned 13 years old. As a birthday gift, Otto and Edith gave her a notebook decorated with red and white squares. The girl had seen it in the window of a shop a few days ago and had fallen in love with that object. From the moment they gave it to her, Anna didn't stop writing. One of the first things she wrote in it was, "I hope I can trust you with everything, like I've never done with anyone else, and I hope you'll be of great help." Then the story spoke for itself. As the situation for the Jews became increasingly complicated and uncertain, Otto Frank anticipated his scarce possibilities. He first tried to get the documents needed to emigrate to the US with his family, but couldn't obtain them due to constant government investigation. That made him prepare a hiding place. He did it along with his Dutch friends and employees, Victor Kugler, Johannes Kleiman, and the German Hermann van Pels. The van Pels family had also planned to hide in the same place. Otto had been preparing a hiding place at Prinsengracht, 263, in the back of the company where he worked. His secretary, Emype Gies, had taken on the enormous risk of covering for her friend's family in case they needed to use that hiding place. Inside the back house, there was a secret passageway behind a library. This passage led to a staircase that led to an attic, which had been conditioned to serve as a refuge in case of need. The 5th of July of 1942. Just 3 weeks after receiving the diary, Anne and her family were forced to put the most feared plans into action. Margot had received a letter requiring her to report to a concentration camp. If she obeyed, her entire family would fall into German hands. The old apartment, which had once housed the hopes for a peaceful life, had to be abandoned. The Franks scrambled everything to try to confuse the officers. They left a hidden note and scattered documents, implying they had fled to Switzerland. But the reality was much more grim and heartbreaking. With barely any possessions, the family was forced to walk several kilometers to their hiding place, since Jews were not allowed to use public transport. Danger lurked from the very first moment. Any patrol could locate them, ask for their documents, and take them to a concentration camp. Once in the secret annex, as Anne described it in her intimate diary, the suffering began immediately. The hideout was 50 square meters spread over 3 floors. In that place, fear was a constant, not only for the family, but also for the 4 brave company employees who took care of them, along with Miep. The penalty for hiding Jews was death, so everyone risked their lives for this cause. The group of people providing support to the Franks consisted of Victor Kugler, Johann Bosvig, Johannes Kleiman, and Beb Bosvig, along with Miep Gies and her husband Jan. Together, they carried out a dangerous routine, providing food, clothing, and news from the outside world to the back house. Would they soon receive more refugees? First, the Van Pels family arrived, and in November, dentist Fritz Pfeffer joined, with whom Anne ended up sharing a room. To avoid their presence being detected at the factory or outside the house, they maintained a strict routine. They had shifts to use the bathroom before 8:30, the time when the first employees who were unaware of the existence of the refugees arrived. Until lunchtime, they had to walk quietly, speak in whispers, and stay away from the windows, even though they were covered. At 12:45 p.m., the Franks would share food and news with some of their protectors. MIP would typically stay in his office watching in case an employee returned unexpectedly. During nap time, Anna used to write, hoping that at 5:45 p.m., everyone went to their homes, and the refugees could come out of the attic to move around the property. The only day off from that fierce and oppressive routine was Sunday, when the alarm clock didn't ring at 6:45 ante meridiem. Living together in the house was complicated. In addition to the fear and growing repression towards Jews who could no longer leave the Netherlands because they had been stripped of their nationality. To this was added the frightful news that the Führer offered monetary rewards to those who denounced concealing persons and people in hiding. The 8 people living in confinement talked about politics, the possibilities of an improvement in the near future, the end of the war, and the persecution. However, time went on, and there were no signs that the siege would end. Anna found refuge in reading and studying with the firm determination to become a writer. She used various fictional characters with whom she communicated in letter format. Among them we can find Kitty Pop, Fee and Connie, Lou Marjan, Jetty, and Emmy. These characters made up a group of Anna's imaginary friends who accompanied her throughout her entire life. Being a teenager in such a stifling environment challenged both Anna and her family. Adolescent rebelliousness mixed with rising tensions. She started to have differences with her mother and came to detest the dentist because he excessively used the only desk in the room. Little Frank missed her friendships and longed for the simple joys of childhood, such as playing in the rain. School became a golden memory that she wished to return to. With so many needs, her diary became her refuge, a place where she poured her deepest thoughts. She wrote not only about her confinement and the German siege, but also her dreams for the future. She began to question her own beliefs and honestly described her impressions of her family and fellow detainees. She captured her vision not only of the atrocious historical moment in which she was trapped, but also of the little things of everyday life. Over time, the conditions of the 8 detainees in the secret hideout began to deteriorate. As for food, as the war dragged on, their protectors found it increasingly difficult to obtain food for them. In addition, they lived in constant fear that Allied bombings could hit their hideout, as they couldn't leave to seek refuge in a safer place. On December 24, 1943, when she had already spent a year and a half in seclusion, Anne wrote in her diary, "I would like to ride a bicycle, dance, whistle, look at the world, feel young and free." However, I can't let that show, because imagine if we all started to complain or put on long faces, where would we end up? Despite everything, she was fully aware that the 8 people living in the Annex were in a paradise, compared to the Jews who weren't hidden, that is, those suffering in the concentration camps. In her diary, she wrote about having her sole romantic encounter in the hideout amidst the world's collapse. Thinking about love in the midst of that context may seem strange, but it was more than possible. The brief love interest was 15-year-old Peter van Pels, whose family first sought refuge with the Franks. The confinement and need for affection brought them closer together. When Anne wasn't reading, studying, or writing, she spent a lot of time with Peter, who became a confidant. In one of her entries, Anne wrote, "The poor boy has more need for certain tenderness than I do. He blushes each night with the goodnight kiss and only begs to get another one." Inevitably, they fell in love. In the darkness of those four walls, they exchanged their first kisses and caresses. What they didn't know was that every gesture, every approach, was permanently in danger of becoming the last. However, Anna soon distanced herself from Peter. Her urgencies were different from his. In 1944, he heard on the radio that the exiled Dutch authorities were asking Jews to keep all kinds of documents proving German occupation and horrors in the Netherlands. From that moment, Anne had a new mission. For that reason, she decided to rewrite the diary to give it a format closer to that of a book. She devoted her time to adding new entries and polishing her writings. Studies, readings, and practice ultimately improved her prose. The last entry she wrote in her diary was dated August 1st, 1944, just 3 days before the Nazis found her hiding place. And that's how our story comes back to the beginning. The day of August 4th, 1944. Between 10:30 and 11 at night, the Nazis arrived at the Prinsengracht Street warehouse. The first person they encountered was the employee Willem van Maren, who sent them upstairs to speak with his bosses. Just in one of the offices on the first floor worked Miep Gies. She later recalled that a small man entered with a revolver in his hand. Before uttering a word, the officer pointed at her head. The other Nazi officers went with Victor Kluger. They asked him a couple of questions and toured the entire building with him. The police went up to the storage room in the front house and asked what all the boxes, bags, and handbags piled up there were. Just when they thought the inspection was over, the officers continued their search. After almost 2 hours, they found the secret door. At that time, Otto Frank was helping Peter van Pels with his studies. Anna's father heard someone running up the stairs. The sound of footsteps signaled an imminent drastic change to him. The door swung open and a uniformed man pointed his gun at him. The Nazis pillaged, searching for valuables and war booty, rummaging through bags and suitcases. The red notebook and Anna's attached writings fell to the floor, scattering across the wooden floor of the back house. The officers not only arrested the 8 in hiding, but also 2 of the protectors, Johannes Kleiman and Viktor Kugler. Fortunately, both survived. Kleiman was released soon due to his delicate health condition, as he suffered from severe stomach problems. Kugler escaped 6 months after his capture, exploiting the chaos from an Allied attack. But not everyone was so lucky. At that time, there were few chances of getting out alive. The 8 Jews who had hidden in the back house were first taken to the Westerbork transit camp in the Netherlands. After several more weeks, precisely on September 3rd, 1944, they were transported by train to Auschwitz-Birkenau in Poland, which by that time was already occupied. Interestingly enough, that was the last time this train performed that job, transporting people to the concentration camp. When they arrived, they began segregating by gender. Sadly, this would be the last time Otto was going to see his wife and daughters. Anna, Margot, Edith and August temporarily stayed at Auschwitz-Birkenau, where they were forced to do heavy labor. Meanwhile, Otto, Hermann, Peter and Fritz were moved to Auschwitz-Fehr, a distant camp located 3 kilometers away, where they also were made to do heavy labor. On October 30th, 1944, Edith saw her daughters for the last time. That day they were taken to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in northern Germany. There the conditions were much more complicated. People suffered from hunger, hygiene was practically non-existent, and overcrowding was a highly contagious focus for infectious diseases, such as typhoid fever, for example. Anne Frank's exact date of death is unknown, but it is estimated to have been between February and March 1945. In that concentration camp, she didn't die in the gas chambers, as has sometimes been claimed. In reality, she succumbed to an illness, possibly typhus. Approximately a month later, around April 15th, British troops liberated the Bergen-Belsen camp. Anna's sister Margot died at the age of 19 or just before reaching it. Their mother Edith died in Auschwitz. Otto was the only survivor of all that horror. When the Russian troops freed him, he was eager to reunite with his family, but sadly that never happened. Anne Frank's writings were found by Bev Boskig and Mip Gies, who took care of preserving all the young girl's notebooks and papers, with the hope of someday being able to return them. Although unfortunately they were unable to fulfill that wish, they did manage to deliver them to her father. That diary was the only thing left of her family, and the man was eager to at least fulfill the last wish of his youngest daughter. Otto Frank meticulously compiled the diaries. While overcoming the pain of having lost each member of his family, he focused on an incredible editorial work. For him, it was like reuniting with Anna and hearing in first person the complex thoughts of a girl becoming a woman. On the other hand, he also rewrote some passages and even took the audacity to change certain parts. As, for example, he omitted some of his daughter's reflections on her parents' marriage. Anna's book was published on June 25, 1947, with the title that she herself had chosen, The House Behind. It would later be known as The Diary of Anne Frank. The first edition was of more than 3,000 copies, a number that would exponentially increase. In 1950, it was published in France and Germany. In 1952, the English translation arrived and impacted readers in England and the United States. The journey of the book never stopped, but as it progressed, one question resurfaced again and again: who had betrayed Anne and her family? Several hypotheses have emerged about who could have betrayed the Franks and their companions. Some argue that it was a Gestapo collaborator, while others believe it was a routine reconnaissance operation that ended in tragedy. These recent years, a new line of investigation has come to light, in which the former Federal Bureau of Investigation agent Vince Van Gogh has played a significant role. According to this theory, a Jewish notary named Arnold Vandenberg could have revealed the hiding place in exchange for protection for him and his family. There are documents that support this conjecture, and even Otto Frank, who died in 1980 at the age of 91, dared to name names. He was aware of Vandenberg's existence but never said anything about it. The truth is that, regardless of who was responsible for the betrayal, or if it was simply a coincidence, the tragic fate of Anna and her family was ultimately due to the anti-Semitic hatred propagated by the followers of the Führer. Anne Frank lived a short but profound life, capturing the surrounding horror with remarkable naturalness, beauty, and even poetry. She died young, unfairly, incomprehensibly, while carrying out a task she never imagined would be so important and relevant. Thousands of schools around the world have Anne's writings as required reading, and millions of people have visited the museum that was created where the Frank family's shelter operated in the Netherlands. Every time someone opens the pages of the iconic book, Anne's dreams of being remembered as a great writer become reality. And that's the video for today. I hope you found the story of Anne Frank interesting. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I also welcome your suggestions for future videos on this channel. I'll leave some videos here for you to keep watching. That's all for now. Goodbye. My name is Fido, and we will surely see each other in the next video of the day.